So, thank you for taking time in your valuable lunch hour. The idea behind these office hours is really to give you a chance to kind of like if you were in a college setting, professors have office hours where you can learn a little bit from them, have a chance to ask more personal questions about what you'd like to learn about. So, that's kind of the idea behind these, just a few minutes over lunch hours, kind of where we're starting today, and then we'll see what times work well for people. So again, short presentation and then some time for questions at the end, really to empower you with some knowledge about how your own body works and be able to use that for your own health going forward. So today we're going to be talking about understanding cortisol and what symptoms are related to cortisol kind of being high or low, and what are some strategies we can use to support our cortisol in everyday life and then when needed, when things are really off. So it's cortisol. The reason we're starting it with it is it's, I think, really the underappreciated hormone. It's upstream to a lot of our other hormones we talk about more commonly, like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, things like that. So this is really where I wanted to start when we're thinking about hormone health in general. So, what is cortisol? So, you're probably familiar with it as the idea of the stress hormone. It is produced by our adrenal glands. So, these are the small little kind of hat-like glands above the kidneys. So, they do some good work for us there. They do produce other hormones like aldosterone, etc. But cortisol is the one we'll be talking about today. It is, of course, well known for being part of our body's way of responding to stress. And when we go into that fight or flight mode, or we have a little bit of stress in our lives, cortisol increases to help us manage that. Um, it helps us by increasing glucose or blood sugar in the body. So when you're running away from that bear, we need sugar in order to have our cells do the work of running. So it increases blood sugar. And then it also helps with breaking down things like fat and protein in the moment. But when what we'll see later with long-term cortisol, that actually increases fat storage. So we'll go into a little more detail there. Our immune system is associated with cortisol as well. A little bit of cortisol can be good, a little too much, we'll see later, does impact it negatively. And then our circadian rhythm, so how we wake up and go to sleep, that's also tied to cortisol as well. So, as you can see, it plays a few different important roles in our body, not just stress, plays some other roles as well. Here, just to show you, this is what's called the HPA axis, which stands for the hypothalamic or hypothalamus, which is a part of our brain. You'll see at the top of that picture there. Pituitary, which is again another part of our brain, that little kind of uvula or dangly looking thing at the bottom of the brain. That's our pituitary, and then our adrenal glands. So each of these three really have a lot of crosstalk and feedback loops, so that way we function well and are producing that cortisol appropriately. What we won't be talking about today is different disease states where cortisol is significantly off. So in Cushing's disease or Cushing's syndrome, or adrenal Cushing syndrome, so Addison's disease, several different diseases that involve cortisol. We won't be covering those today. Those are kind of on one end of the spectrum of cortisol, if you want to think about it that way. We'll be talking about kind of closer to the middle or far side of that threshold or spectrum of cortisol. That's a little more, it's a little more dysfunction. So it's not a full-blown disease, but the cortisol is off either too high or too low, where it's affecting the body negatively. So the word for that is HPA axis dysfunction. If you look in the medical literature, that's what you'll see it under. Um, in the naturopathic or chiropractic world, you may also hear this referred to or have heard this referred to as adrenal fatigue. So not necessarily wrong, but our adrenal glands don't quite get fatigued the way we think about it. So if you hear adrenal fatigue, that's really what it's referring to is HPA axis dysfunction in the medical literature. So if you hear people saying, oh, adrenal fatigue isn't real, they're sort of right. It's not quite real in the sense that the adrenals get fatigued, but the adrenals can develop some dysfunction that isn't a full-blown disease like Cushing's disease that is worth talking about when we're thinking about optimizing health. So that's really what we're doing or working on doing is how do we empower you to be healthy and stay healthy. So that's really where the HPA axis dysfunction comes in. So now moving on to what is normal cortisol. So cortisol normally comes up in the morning and then comes down throughout the afternoon and reaches a lower point at night. So this is normal. Sometimes we'll measure what's called a cortisol awakening response. So that's that cortisol within the first 30 minutes of waking up. Um, and that can be helpful to see, okay, where is someone doing in the early part of the day? And then it comes down at night. What we'll see as we go forward is how this can be disrupted with cortisol or HPA axis dysfunction. So this is normal. And then again, this is normal. So this is an example of a test result. If we measured somebody's cortisol, which we can do through usually urine or saliva testing, we'll look at cortisol at multiple points throughout the day. You could do it with blood testing as well. It would just be very inconvenient to have someone go to the lab within 30 minutes of waking up and then go back at lunchtime, go back in the afternoon, go back before bed. It just isn't really practical. So that's why we tend to use urine or saliva, which is pretty accurate. Um, Sometimes people will want to order more insurance-based labs or cortisol through a more conventional setting. And you'll see we'll measure a cortisol blood test in the morning. And that's just one point in time. So it can be helpful more when you're looking at those diseases we talked about earlier, like Cushing's disease, etc. But it's not as helpful when you're talking about dysfunction, because dysfunction is really that dynamic curve that we're looking at. So again, that's why I tend to do more of a urine or saliva test over time throughout the day. So this is moving on to looking at a cortisol curve with chronic stress. So when someone is chronically stressed, they may feel a little more wired but tired. Maybe you've had this in different seasons of life where you've had trouble maybe falling asleep due to feeling kind of wired. Your body's exhausted, but the brain is still moving. So this is often associated with higher cortisol at night, so trouble falling asleep. Sometimes this will also continue into the early morning. So people will not sleep as deeply and then they'll wake up earlier than they want, that 2 to 4 a.m. kind of wake up. I call them stress wake ups. So someone's cortisol is coming up earlier than we want it to. That's a sign of chronic stress. So rising earlier in the day or staying higher at night. And then if we continued with time, so someone was chronically stressed over months to years, we'll see what's kind of a flattened cortisol curve or more burnout. So this is when cortisol in general is just pretty low. Typically, people will say, I'm having trouble, waking up is really hard. I'm just super tired. Or I just want to sleep all the time. Or I exercise, but I feel even more exhausted afterwards. So all of these things can be associated with low cortisol. Obviously, we want to think about other things. So when you do come to see me or other docs, we think about a differential and other things that could be causing these symptoms, but can be some of them associated with low cortisol. So specific symptoms of high cortisol. So we talked about the wired but tired, particularly difficulty falling asleep or racing thoughts is a common one. Weight gain, this is definitely one that plays a role. Obviously, there can be other factors that cause weight gain in the middle of the body, but cortisol is definitely one thing to consider. Salt and sugar cravings. Cortisol drives up our body's use of or release of glucose. So we need more to kind of replace it. So those sugar cravings can come into play. The adrenal glands also are in charge of um, controlling our sodium and potassium, among other parts of the body, but that can also affect our salt cravings as well, if those adrenals aren't quite functioning at a higher level or at a good level. Blood pressure can certainly be associated. So if you ever been stressed, you might have noticed the blood pressure tends to go up. So that's cortisol helping you out. And then cycle changes, which we'll talk about a little bit more. So things like PMS, irregular periods, can be associated with high cortisol as well. And then chronic stress. So stress we think about in the fight or flight, or you may have heard of it referred to as the sympathetic nervous system. So this sympathetic nervous system is telling us to run from the bear. When we're running from the bear, we don't really want to have a bowel movement at that time. That's not the time to rest and digest, right? So what chronic stress does is it tends to slow down our gut motility and can cause things like constipation in the long run, or in the short run, acute stress can sometimes cause some more motility, like, okay, let's get the bowels out of the way so we can run from the bear. So diarrhea can sometimes happen initially, but chronic tends to be more associated with constipation. Symptoms of low cortisol. So again, this may be after having high cortisol for prolonged periods. Those adrenal glands, in a sense, kind of get fatigued or they don't produce as much. They're adapting, really, is what it is, and that causes low cortisol to be produced. So this can cause fatigue, dizziness, low blood pressure, kind of poor mood. You can imagine if cortisol is pretty low, someone feels fatigue, that'll of course cause the mood to be low as well. People don't tolerate exercise as well. They exercise, they feel pretty wiped out. And then sometimes low blood sugar can be associated with it as well. Cortisol importantly impacts other areas of the body, as we touched on a little bit at the beginning. So, in particular, our thyroid gland. Cortisol does affect the conversion of T4, which is one of the main types of thyroid hormone our body produces. The medication equivalent is referred to as levothyroxine. And then T3, which is converted by our body, is really the main form of thyroid hormone that does the metabolic work of our body. It does the work of giving us energy and helping us to regulate our metabolism. But this is reduced when someone's in more of a stress state or cortisol is high, which can worsen low thyroid. So if I'm working with someone on hypothyroidism, sometimes we'll need to consider addressing cortisol as part of that. Um, Sex hormones. I have a slide, I think after this slide, a little bit more on talking about how this is related. But when cortisol is higher, it causes our body to produce less progesterone relatively, along with some of the other hormones like estrogen, testosterone, and that can affect how we feel. So progesterone's kind of that hormone that makes us feel a little more relaxed, grounded. So when it's low, we may feel a little bit wired sometimes or irritable, which can be associated with PMS or premenstrual syndrome, that period before our cycle. Blood sugar. Because cortisol causes us to increase our blood sugar, it's trying to help us give our muscles energy by releasing that blood sugar we've stored up or have around. Blood sugar, when it's released into the bloodstream, has to enter our blood cells, but it does that using insulin as a signal. So, insulin tells our body to put glucose from the bloodstream into our cells so our cells can use it for energy. But when that loop keeps happening, and cortisol continues to tell blood sugar to go high, that causes insulin resistance. So our body gets kind of tired of listening to that insulin tell us to store blood sugar, and insulin resistance can develop. So you may have seen this when people are stressed for long periods of time, they may develop that weight gain around their abdomen associated with insulin resistance. And then the immune system, they've actually done interesting studies looking at if somebody gets a good night's sleep before getting their flu shot versus getting a poor night's sleep before their flu shot, how their immune system responds to getting the flu shot. So those people that slept poorly, which again causes increase in cortisol, actually resulted in not mounting as good of a immune response to that flu vaccine. So they actually got less benefit from the flu vaccine just by not sleeping well the night before. So pros and cons to flu vaccines, that's another conversation, but just as an example, that was an interesting study. And then melatonin here. So sleep cortisol plays a role with melatonin. When people are more wired but tired and that cortisol is higher, less melatonin is produced. People don't sleep as deeply, and then again can wake up a little bit early as well, earlier than they want to. So this is looking at in a little more detail that concept I was talking about earlier, how cortisol affects our sex hormones. So this is referred to as a cortisol steal. So when our body needs to produce or is producing more cortisol, we tend to not. It takes it from rather than keeping it in progesterone, our body continues to convert that steroid hormone into cortisol, or not producing things like DHEA, testosterone, estrogen. So we call it cortisol steal. It's not exactly stealing from the other hormones, but in a sense it is. We're making more cortisol and less of those other hormones preferentially. So things that raise cortisol, so stress, obviously, having blood sugar swings. So when people aren't maybe getting enough protein or fiber and their blood sugar is going high and then low, that low point causes our cortisol to be released to help us increase that blood sugar that we need. Caffeine and nicotine both increase cortisol, so caffeine is important to kind of personalize that dose. Some people can tolerate it, some people can't. Um, Poor sleep. So we talked about that increasing cortisol. Overtraining, this is an important one in athletes in particular. I'm cautious to be mindful of, so that's why I always ask about exercise during initial and follow-up visits for annual exams. Overtraining can actually increase cortisol as well. And then illness, inflammation, acutely, we increase that cortisol, and that can be a good thing. It helps our immune response when we acutely increase cortisol when we're sick. But when someone's sick for a long time, it can cause chronic inflammation from that cortisol being high. That immune response, we're trying to trigger it too high for too long. So it's kind of that Goldilocks concept again. So what lowers cortisol? This picture here, so being in a hammock with a book for me, can help lower cortisol. Importantly, kind of like the opposite of what we just talked about in some ways, a consistent sleep schedule. If you've read Matthew Walker's book or seen anything that he puts out about sleep, he's kind of like the sleep guru. He wrote the book Why We Sleep. A consistent sleep schedule, so consistent bedtime and wake time as much as possible, really helps that circadian rhythm get into a good rhythm, a good state, and helps with cortisol regulation. At the bottom there, you'll see evening wind down. This is very important. So, I think in our culture, we're just kind of used to watching something before we go to bed, maybe a movie or a show. Not necessarily a bad time. It can be a nice way to, bond with family if that's what you enjoy. But when we just do that and then go right to bed, try to lay our head on the pillow, going from one activity to the other, it really doesn't allow our body to unwind and support that cortisol curve. So, I'm often encouraging people to take time, even if it's just 5 to 10 minutes, without a screen to do something that they enjoy. So, journaling, reading a book, meditation, whatever it is, that evening wind down is pretty important. They've done some good studies showing reading a book is actually similar to meditation to help that mind unwind a bit, which is pretty cool. So, take advantage with something you enjoy. And then balanced meals, so keeping blood sugar balanced is important, getting those good proteins, healthy fats in. Mind body practices, relaxation things obviously can help with cortisol. And then moderate exercise, so exercise that feels good. After exercise, people should feel a little more energized, not totally wiped out. That means they're probably overdoing it. And then here I've got some supportive supplements. I always recommend doing these in conjunction with advice from myself, or if I'm not your doc, with whoever is your doc. Um, Particularly adaptogens, which help our body adapt to levels of cortisol. So if cortisol is high, it can help bring it down a little bit. If cortisol is low, it'll help bring it up a little bit. Some of my favorites are listed here. Cordyceps in particular, I really like. Rhodiola, ginseng, ashwagandha, those can all be helpful. And studies show doing them in a mix, so doing them in combination with each other tends to be more beneficial than doing them on their own. So it's kind of interesting. And then the other vitamins I've listed here can be helpful for supporting cortisol. And then phosphatidylserine in particular, I'll use if someone's has high cortisol, particularly at night, kind of as a sleep aid. It helps to reduce cortisol at night to result in deeper sleep. But what I like about it is that over time, it reduces the body kind of responds and reduces cortisol over time, so people don't tend to need it long term. It tends to be for a few weeks, a few months to get people kind of regulated again. And then they start to find they're waking up a little more sleepy, groggy. They don't need it anymore. So that's kind of what I like about it in terms of treating sleep. It's not like habit forming. It's really helping heal the body, actually. So then some key takeaways here. Cortisol, it's really about that Goldilocks. We want it in the right places at the right time. And then lifestyle is really key. Supplements can help. Definitely make use of them. But really, if I had to pick one thing, sleep would be wind down routine would be what I would recommend. If someone was only going to do one thing, the wind down routines where I would really put the money. And then testing can be helpful. A lot of us docs in the functional space actually won't test cortisol just because you can really listen to someone's story. Like you could probably hear me describing it and go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So a lot of us won't really do testing, but sometimes I'll do it if we're still kind of figuring it out and could use some feedback. Or if someone's clearly very stressed, but sometimes they can't see it. Sometimes I'll offer it to kind of help give them some feedback they can see in black and white. Sometimes that's a little easier. Um, so I'm gonna go ahead